Has anyone ever thought about what it means to be beautiful? At some point, I'm sure that you think it means to be perfect, that those two terms are somewhat synonymous. Well, I would like to challenge that concept tonight, and I'd like to challenge it with an example that I'm sure most of you haven't thought of at all. Tube paint. But in order to make that make sense, I have to start with a different invention first. In 1839, a Frenchman by the name of Jacques-Louis Mandé Daguerre formally announced the invention of the daguerreotype, a kind of photograph, exemplified here, in Paris, France. For the first time, there was a fairly intuitive, consistent, and fast way to capture the world in perfect accuracy. Anybody could now take a photograph. And artists were distraught. Up until this point, art had been all about perfection. Artists were trying to go for more realism, more detail, more complexity, closer to real life. Artists were training their whole lives to be able to accomplish this. And yes, there were some differentiating ideals between art movements, such as the artistic liberties taken with lighting during the Baroque period in order to add drama. But the underlying goal was always accuracy. And then this French guy shows up and takes that all away. Artists who had been training their whole lives in order to paint technically perfect art face the very legitimate risk of now being out of work. More than just that, photographers began to start taking photographs and arranging them to make them more artistic. How were you, as an artist, supposed to compete with somebody who was able to achieve perfection with just a machine? You can't. Fortunately, salvation arrived 2 years later, and in a rather surprising form. In 1841, an American by the name of John Rand filed a patent for tubed paint. And he created a turning point that changed the world of art forever. Prior to this point, artists have been required to stay in studio as a basic constraint of their profession. They had to mix their own paint, and it dried insanely quickly. If you made large quantities and then left your studio to try and paint something, the paint would dry and become completely unusable before you could ever even begin your painting. However, with tubed paint, you could now go out into the world and you could paint whatever you wanted to. And you could paint it with perfect accuracy. But wait, hang on. Why does going out into the world and painting with more accuracy help artists? They're already being outcompeted by photographers. The solution to this quandary was rather simple. Artists stopped painting accurately. Now, it's incredibly hard to understate what a massive decision that was. In the Western world, we can pretty much point to Greeks as the start of art, and they were obsessed with perfection. Every art movement they had, perfection was their goal. Perfection in movement, perfection in the human body, perfection in emotion, perfection in art. Now, the very good reason for this is that the Greeks didn't think they were making art for their fellow citizens. They were making art for their gods. In fact, they didn't even think of themselves as making art as we think of it. They were making just pieces with deeply religious significance. The artistic legacy of perfection after the Greeks lasted for literally thousands of years, until tubed paint. It did take a little while to catch on though, and our story really picks up in 1870. In 1870, during the Franco-Prussian War, a little-known French artist by the name of Claude Monet moved to London in order to escape conscription. Once there, he became familiar with the work of J.M.W. Turner, a famous sort of pre-impressionist painter, famous for the way that he worked with light in order to create drama in his artwork. Monet became fascinated with light and was determined to capture it in his art. He took an innovative but rather logical approach to this artwork, one only possible because of the relatively recent development of tubed paint. He would choose a subject to paint at a given period of time. I'm going to use Westminster Palace as an example because it's one of my favorite series of his. Monet decided he wanted to work with Westminster Palace, and so, day after day, he would go back to the same view looking at the palace. And he would paint what he saw. Except Monet went back at different times of day, and he wasn't bothered with the details of the palace. He was only interested in capturing the different light that shone down each time. This is why Monet painted so differently to his predecessors. His predecessors were focusing on the details, capturing the details of his subject and showing it as accurately as possible. Monet was abandoning that tenet solely to capture light. Of course, artists and critics at the time absolutely hated this new style. The term impressionism for the style actually arose after a critic tried to insult the whole movement. and said that the paintings were just impressions of something. But the artists and critics were missing the far more important development occurring right in front of their eyes. Monet was the first artist to capture the light where it lay and bring it before an audience. In Monet's rendition, light was no longer assumed to be from a single point behaving in a single way. Light flickered across the canvas, it appeared, it disappeared, and it was captured beautifully by his masterful command of color. No artist before him had been able to accomplish this, and Monet was able to capture the light where it lay, bring it before an audience, and he showed every artist after him how to do so. More than just that impact, Monet made a second impact on the world of art. He changed the way that paintings were presented. Monet's early work, his early projects, are not necessarily impressive as standalone projects. They were never meant to be. Monet painted in series, not in individual paintings. Remember, the light was Monet's ultimate subject, how she danced and played her way through a scene. That is impossible to capture and display without the comparison presented by a series. Artists had rarely painted that way before, and interestingly, they rarely did so again. That doesn't make Monet's break from tradition any less impressive. Monet's third major impact was almost unintentional. After he returned from London after the Franco-Prussian War, Monet kept up his same painting practices in Paris. And he would go to the same spot once he selected a subject, and day after day he would go back to the same place, still at different times, and paint what he saw. But in doing so, Monet inadvertently captured the most important historical movement humankind has ever experienced, the Industrial Revolution. Not only was he capturing the physical changes to the city of Paris, he was also capturing the social changes. His series of paintings at the Saint Lazare station epitomizes this. Not only is Monet painting a modern marvel, the new artery of the city, in the actual train station, he's also painting the social classes and the people who move through it. You can see the outfits changing, the nature of person adapting, even the mixing of social classes who really would not have mixed prior to that point. It's quite remarkable to notice. And yet, all of these impacts pale before Monet's most important impact and, quite possibly, his bravest. Monet broke the tradition of perfection in art, creating a massive turning point. After Monet, artists were no longer bothered with trying to show perfect details and perfect accuracy in their work. Instead, they were interested in capturing the world in new ways. Monet started by capturing light. Cubist painters were interested in perspectives, and capturing as many of them as possible and showing them all at precisely the same time. Fauvists were interested in capturing color and displaying it brightly and garishly, also to the chagrin of critics, who tried to insult the style saying that they painted like wild beasts or fauves. But the most interesting, I think, might be the post-impressionists. The most famous of this art movement in the modern day is Vincent van Gogh, which would have been quite a surprise to him. Van Gogh abandoned almost every technical tenet in his early artwork. He leaned into this abandonment of technical perfection. His canvases were colorful, chaotic, and totally unrealistic. His paint was lumpy, messy, ridged. He left blank spots on his canvas. And yet, once you step back, he's accomplished something beautiful. Starry Night isn't an accurate portrayal of what a night sky looks like. It was never meant to be. The lighting is a bit strange. The colors are decidedly off. Every perspective is just wrong. And yet, he's managed to capture the feeling of lying under a dazzling night sky with someone you love, and to feel truly happy, staring up at the beautiful and infinite expanse of our universe, marveling at the paradoxically otherworldly beauty of this world we call home. All of that development comes back to a simple tube of paint and the artistic innovation in response to the daguerreotype. But I think the question I have to answer now is why you all should care about this. I see some of you care about it just because it's interesting, or maybe you love art. I'm sure other people are entirely apathetic towards art, or at least to everything that happened since Impressionism started. I would argue that this change has some relevance for life itself. In breaking perfection, artists showed the world that something does not have to be perfect in order to be considered beautiful. That can be applied to anything, and it can be applied to people. It shows you that a bit of hair, or even a lot of hair that's just not cooperating, yes, that is my younger sister, doesn't mean that you are any less beautiful once you take a few steps back. It tells you that a detail out of place on your outfit doesn't make it any less good. Any imperfection that you see in yourself does not matter once people take a few steps back and appreciate the canvas in its entirety. Why stop there? It tells us that the little mistakes we make daily, or even the big mistakes, do not matter in the full canvas of our lives. What matters is what people see whenever they take a few steps back. What story do you tell? How do you make the people around you feel? How do you break the confines around you for the better and for the sake of others? How do you change how people experience the art gallery of life? As we put ourselves up on the wall with all of these other amazing works of humankind, we do not have to be perfect. We are beautiful in our entirety. Breaking perfection is a remarkable accomplishment indeed, and one, I would argue, that poured from a simple tube of paint. Thank you very much.